They locked me out of my own childhood home 11 days after we buried our parents. My brother looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad was clear. The son carries the legacy. The daughter moves on." After I spent 18 months taking care of our dying mother, after I gave up my life to keep this family together, I stood in the rain with a cardboard box in my hands, replaced, erased, unwanted. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that my mother had been planning something in silence for 8 years. And when her will was finally read, the same brother who threw me out couldn't even stand on his own feet. What did she leave behind? Why was there a video recording? And how did the unwanted daughter walk away with everything? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about inheritance. It's about quiet justice. If you believe daughters deserve more than leftovers, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and show some love. Because sometimes the one they underestimate becomes the one they never saw coming. My name is Eliza Grant. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago my older brother stood in the doorway of the house we grew up in and told me, "Dad was clear. The son carries the legacy. The daughter moves on." Then he took the spare key out of my hand and shut the door in my face. It had been 11 days since we buried our parents. The lilies from the funeral were still fresh in the trash bin by the curb when he changed the locks. I remember standing there on the porch, holding a cardboard box with my mother's baking pans inside it, thinking, this cannot be real. I took care of her for 18 months. I slept on the recliner beside her hospital bed when the chemo made her too weak to climb the stairs. I learned how to flush IV lines. I memorized medication schedules. I washed her hair when she was too embarrassed to let anyone else see how much of it had fallen out. My brother came 4 times. 4. And now he was telling me I had overstayed? "You're emotional," he said, adjusting the cufflinks our father gave him at his college graduation. "Dad wanted everything consolidated. It's cleaner this way." Cleaner. As if I were clutter. The house wasn't just property. It was scraped knees on the driveway. It was my mother's wind chimes and the maple tree. It was the kitchen where she taught me how to knead dough by feel, not by recipe. It was the hallway where my father once told me when I was 9, "You're bright, Ellie, but you won't need all that ambition. Your brother will handle the big things." I learned early what big things meant. They meant him. He was the future. I was the helper. And I helped. God, I helped. When Dad's heart started failing, I managed his appointments. When Mom's cancer spread, I cut my hours at work and moved back in. I told myself love didn't keep score. But apparently, inheritance did. The night he locked me out, it rained. Not dramatically, just steady, inconvenient rain. Enough to soak the cardboard box at my feet. Enough to blur the porch light into a halo I couldn't look at directly. I called the only person who had ever seen me clearly, my Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. She didn't ask questions. She said, "Where are you?" And 20 minutes later, her car pulled up beside me. On the drive to her apartment, I stared out the window and thought about how small I felt, not because of money, because of confirmation. Confirmation that no matter how much I gave, I was still the afterthought. What I didn't know, what my brother didn't know, was that my mother had never been as passive as she appeared. For years, my father handled the visible finances, the investments, the legacy. He liked control. He liked being the architect of our future. But my mother had her own quiet architecture. When I was 26, right after I finished my master's degree in social work, paid for with scholarships and late-night tutoring jobs, she took me out for coffee. "You're going to build something meaningful," she said, stirring her tea. "Don't let anyone shrink that." I thought it was encouragement. It was more than that. Over the next 7 years, while I was busy with clients and crisis calls and the slow, exhausting work of helping other people survive their worst days, my mother was meeting with a lawyer once a month. She never told me the details. She didn't want to create a war before it was necessary. But she saw the writing on the wall. She saw how my father deferred everything to my brother, how my brother absorbed that deference like oxygen, how family dinners revolved around his promotions, his plans, his responsibilities, while my work was described as sweet or compassionate, never essential. When my mother's diagnosis became terminal, something in her shifted. She stopped asking for permission. The will reading was scheduled 2 weeks after the funeral. I almost didn't go. I didn't want to sit across from my brother and watch him perform grief like a business presentation. But my aunt squeezed my hand and said, "Your mother asked me to be there." So I went. The lawyer's office was smaller than I expected. No dramatic wood paneling, just a round table and a window that let in too much sunlight for the mood. My brother arrived late, confident. He wore navy. He always wore navy when he wanted to look trustworthy. He didn't look at me. The lawyer began with my father's will. It was exactly what everyone expected. 75% of liquid assets to my brother, the remainder divided between debts, minor bequests, and a modest sum to me. He didn't smirk, but he didn't have to. Then the lawyer cleared her throat and said, "We will now read the will of Margaret Grant." My mother's name in that quiet room felt like a pulse. My brother leaned back. "There won't be much," he said casually. "She didn't manage finances." The lawyer's expression didn't change. "Your mother," she said evenly, "managed more than you realize. 5 years before her death, during a period when my father was restructuring his business to protect assets from potential litigation, the family home had been transferred into my mother's sole name, for legal shielding. It was never transferred back. My brother's posture changed first. A small shift, a tightening. The house, currently valued at just under $800,000, belonged to my mother alone. And in her will, she left it to me. Not as a reward, as protection. The lawyer continued. An irrevocable trust had been established 8 years earlier, funded initially with money my grandmother had left specifically to my mother, with the instruction that it be used for the daughter who will need independence. My mother invested it steadily, quietly, patiently. By the time of her death, it had grown to just over $1.6 million. Sole beneficiary, Eliza Grant. My brother actually laughed. "This is ridiculous." He was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. The lawyer slid a document across the table. A psychiatric evaluation confirming full cognitive capacity at the time of signing. And then, because my mother anticipated everything, a video recording. In it, she sat at this very table, pale but steady, and said, "I love both my children. But love does not require blindness. My daughter has given without guarantee her entire life. I want her to have something that does not depend on anyone's approval." I didn't realize I was crying until my aunt gave me a tissue. My brother's face went from red to white. He tried anger first, then logic, then accusation. "You knew," he said to me. "You manipulated her." I shook my head. I hadn't known. That was the point. My mother didn't want me living differently out of expectation. She wanted me protected without obligation. There was one more piece. A life insurance policy. $500,000. Purchased when I was 22. The beneficiary had always been me. Not because she loved me more, but because she knew I would never demand it. When the lawyer finished summarizing the total, just under $3 million in combined assets, my brother stood up too quickly and had to grip the table to steady himself. For the first time in his life, the ground wasn't automatically solid beneath him. He looked at me like I had stolen something. But I hadn't taken anything. I had simply shown up, for years. After the reading, he cornered me in the hallway. "You can't just walk away with everything," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of something new. Fear. "We're family." Family. It's amazing how that word only seems to surface when someone needs you. "I'm not walking away with everything," I said quietly. "I'm walking away with what Mom chose." He told me I was being selfish. For the first time in my life, I didn't argue. Maybe I was. Maybe choosing not to rescue someone who never protected you looks like selfishness from the outside. I moved back into the house 2 months later. Not immediately. I needed time to breathe. The first night I slept there again, I stood in the kitchen and ran my fingers over the counter where I once organized medication schedules. I stepped into the backyard and found the rosemary bush my mother planted the year I started college. It had grown wild. Unapologetic. I kept my job. That surprised people. They expected me to quit, to travel, to upgrade. But the money wasn't an escape route. It was freedom. Freedom to work because I wanted to, not because I was terrified of one emergency destroying me. Freedom to say no. Freedom to fund a scholarship at the community college for first-generation women in healthcare programs. Freedom to breathe. My brother and I don't speak much now. Last I heard, he downsized. Sold the house he stretched himself to afford. The pressure he once hid behind confidence finally caught up to him. I don't celebrate that, but I don't carry it either. What I carry is my mother's voice, steady in that video. "Independence is not cruelty," she said. "It is safety. If you've ever been made to feel like the extra, the backup plan, the helper instead of the heir, I want you to hear me. Your worth is not measured by who claps for you at the dinner table. It is measured by who you are when no one is watching. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's 8 years of quiet planning. Sometimes it's a woman in a lavender-scented room deciding her daughter will never stand in the rain again, wondering if she matters. If this story found something in you, something familiar, something healing, stay with this channel. Like the video, subscribe, share where you're watching from and what time it is in your world right now. Because somewhere out there is another daughter standing on a porch in the rain. And she needs to know the door that closes on her might not be the end of her story. It might be the moment her real inheritance begins.